I trusted my own son with everything I had, not just my savings, but my faith, my future, and the quiet belief that love protects you. When he looked me in the eyes and promised I would be safe, I believed him without hesitation. Why would I doubt the child I raised with my own hands? But trust has a way of revealing the truth slowly, not with noise, not with anger. It reveals itself in silence, in empty accounts, and in the moment you realize the person you protected was never protecting you at all. I did not raise my voice when my son told me I was being difficult. I did not interrupt him when he said everything he said was for my own good. I just sat there, hands folded, listening the way I always had. But something inside me stopped bending that day. My name is Ruth Carter. I am 65 years old, and for most of my life I believed love meant endurance. That belief almost cost me everything. It happened on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, not during a holiday, not during an argument. Those are easier to prepare for. This was ordinary, and ordinary moments are where the deepest betrayals hide. My son Daniel sat across from me at my kitchen table, the same table where I taught him to count with dried beans, where I patched his school pants, where I waited up nights when he was late. He tapped his phone impatiently and sighed. "Mom, we have talked about this. You cannot keep relying on us forever. Us." That word landed heavy. I looked at the chipped mug in front of me. The tea had gone cold, but I kept holding it like warmth might return. "I have never relied on you, Daniel," I said softly. He frowned, the way people do when they are already convinced they are right. "We cover your expenses, the mortgage, utilities, groceries. You should be grateful, grateful." That was when my chest tightened, because for the last 6 months I had been choosing between medication and electricity. But I said nothing. Not because I was afraid, because I wanted to understand how far the lie went. Daniel left soon after, hugged me quickly, kissed my cheek without meeting my eyes. When the door closed, the house felt larger than it ever had. I opened the drawer where I kept my bills, late notices, shut-off warnings, handwritten reminders to myself. Nothing from my son. That night I slept in my clothes. I stared at the ceiling and replayed every conversation we had in the past year. "The check is on the way, Mom. My wife handles all that now. You worry too much." I stopped crying somewhere around dawn, and I made a decision. I would not accuse. I would not beg. I would not embarrass him. I would watch. The following weeks revealed more than any argument ever could. His wife would visit with gifts that could not be returned. Candles, scarves, decorative plates, never groceries, never cash, never receipts. She spoke to me slowly, carefully, like I was a fragile thing that might break. You know how memory can be at your age. I smiled. I remembered everything. I wrote it down. Dates, times, words. I visited the bank quietly. Nothing. No transfers, no deposits, no accounts. I checked again and again. Nothing. The truth did not hurt as much as the realization that they believed I would never check, that I was old enough to dismiss. I kept living as I had. Soup stretched into 3 meals, lights off early, church pantry boxes accepted with grace. And still, Daniel spoke proudly to others about how well he took care of his mother. That was when I understood something. He was not lying to hurt me. He was lying to protect the image of himself, and that kind of lie is the hardest to confront. I invited them both to dinner, not to accuse, to confirm. I cooked his favorite meal. I set the table carefully. I listened as they talked about their new car, their trips, their future. And then I asked one simple question. Which day does the support come through each month? They answered differently. Silence fell. No yelling followed, only truth. By the time Daniel realized what had been happening, his face had changed in a way I will never forget. Not anger, shame. I did not demand repayment. I did not threaten court. I only said this: I am not angry, but I am no longer giving my dignity away to preserve your comfort. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. I did not gain money that day. I gained something better: clarity. I did not speak to Daniel for several weeks after that night, not because I was angry, because I needed to understand who I was without constantly preparing myself to be misunderstood. The house grew quieter, not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the honest kind, the kind that forces you to hear your own thoughts. In that silence, I began to notice how much of my life had been shaped around making other people comfortable. I woke early, as I always had, made tea, sat by the window, watched the neighbor's dog trace the same patch of grass every morning like it was guarding a secret. Nothing had changed outside, but inside me, something had shifted. I no longer felt the need to explain myself to empty rooms. A week later, Daniel called. His voice was careful, softer than usual. "Mom, I have been going through the accounts." I said nothing. There was a pause, heavy with things he did not yet know how to say. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because I had once used that same word to protect him. I asked only one question: "Do you want to understand, or do you want to fix it quietly?" He did not answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was smaller. "I want to understand." So I told him, not all at once, not with anger, just facts, dates, numbers, the bank visits, the ledger. I could hear his breathing change. He asked me why I had not said anything sooner. I told him the truth, because I wanted to know whether you would listen once the noise was gone. That call ended without resolution. But something else ended too. The illusion that staying quiet keeps relationships intact. A few days later, his wife came alone. She did not bring gifts this time. She sat stiffly on the edge of the couch, hands folded too tightly. "You have put Daniel in a very difficult position," she said. I nodded. "I know." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Families handle things privately. There was no need to involve banks or records." I looked at her carefully. I did not involve anyone. I protected myself. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You are overreacting." That word again. Overreacting. A word used when someone finally stops absorbing damage politely. I stood slowly. My knees protested, but I steadied myself. "I am not reacting. I am responding." She left soon after. No slammed door. No dramatic exit. Just the quiet sound of control slipping away. That evening, I sat at my table with the ledger open. I did not feel victorious. I felt tired. But it was a clean kind of tired. The kind that comes after telling the truth. Weeks passed. Daniel came by one afternoon without calling first. He looked older. Not in years, in weight. He sat where he always had, across from me, but this time his phone stayed in his pocket. "I owe you an apology," he said. I did not rush to accept it. Apologies mean little without understanding. So I waited. I let him talk. He told me how convenient it had been to let someone else handle things. How easy it was to believe everything was fine when the numbers stayed invisible. How uncomfortable it was to admit he had stopped checking. I listened, not as a mother trying to protect her child, but as a woman listening to another adult take responsibility. "I am fixing it," he said. "All of it." I nodded. "Good." He looked at me then, really looked. "You should have told me." I met his eyes. "You should have asked." Silence settled between us. Not the old silence. This one had weight, but also honesty. Before he left, he asked if I needed anything. I smiled gently. Yes, respect. That word seemed to stay with him as he walked out. Life did not suddenly become easy after that. Bills still existed, my body still aged, the house still creaked at night. But something was different. I stopped apologizing for needing rest. I stopped explaining my boundaries. I stopped giving more than I could afford emotionally. And in that space, something unexpected grew. Peace. Not loud peace. Not celebratory peace. The quiet kind that sits with you while you drink your tea and reminds you that your worth was never dependent on how much you gave away. One afternoon, I received a letter from the church pantry thanking me for my years of volunteering. I smiled. I had never told them my situation had changed. I still believed in showing up for others, just not at the cost of disappearing myself. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer with my ledger, not as evidence, as a reminder that survival teaches you things comfort never will. And dignity, once reclaimed, changes the way you walk through every remaining day. I did not become harder. I became clearer. And clarity is something no one can take from you once you have earned it. The weeks that followed moved slowly, the way time does when life is no longer rushing you forward with emergencies. I found myself settling into a rhythm that felt unfamiliar but steady. Morning light, tea, silence. I started walking again, short walks at first, just to the end of the street and back. The same houses, the same cracked sidewalks, the same oak tree with the split trunk that had survived every storm Texas had thrown at it. As I walked, I realized how often I had rushed in the past, rushed conversations, rushed forgiveness, rushed sacrifices, always afraid that if I slowed down, something would fall apart. But nothing did. Instead, things began to come together. One afternoon, Daniel called and asked if he could come by to talk. Not to explain, not to defend, just to talk. When he arrived, he did not sit right away. He stood near the window, hands in his pockets, staring out at the yard where he used to play as a child. "I forgot how small this place feels," he said quietly. I smiled. It never felt small to me. He turned, surprised. It held everything I needed. That seemed to land somewhere deep in him. He sat down and told me things he had never said before, about the pressure he felt to keep moving upward, about how success had quietly turned into fear of falling, about how trusting his wife with everything felt easier than admitting he was overwhelmed. I listened without interrupting. There was no satisfaction in being right, only relief in finally being heard. He admitted he had ignored small doubts because acknowledging them would have required him to slow down, to look, to choose differently. I told him something I had learned too late in life: avoidance always charges interest. He nodded slowly. "I think I understand that now." After that conversation, something softened between us, not returned to what it was, but reshaped. He began visiting more often, not with gifts or apologies, with presence. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we sat quietly. Both felt enough. His wife stopped coming altogether. I did not ask about her. Daniel did not offer explanations. Some truths do not need commentary. As months passed, I noticed my body responding to the calm. My sleep improved. The tightness in my chest loosened. Even my appetite changed. Stress had been feeding on me quietly for years. Now that it was gone, my body finally exhaled. I began organizing the house, not in a frantic way, in a deliberate one. I sorted old papers, letters, photographs. I found notes from my husband tucked into drawers, small messages, simple handwriting: "Proud of you. Thank you for holding us together." I sat on the floor and cried, not from sadness, from release. Grief changes shape when it is allowed space. One afternoon, while cleaning out the hall closet, I found the old coat I used to wear to church on Sundays. The pocket still held a few coins. I smiled. I had been carrying just enough for years, always just enough. I folded the coat carefully and placed it back. Not because I needed it, because it reminded me of who I had been, and who I was no longer willing to be. Around that time, a woman from church knocked on my door. She looked nervous. She said she had heard I was good with numbers, that her nephew had been helping her with her finances and things did not feel right. As she spoke, her hands trembled the way mine once had. I invited her in, poured tea, listened. Her story was different, but the feeling was the same: confusion, guilt, fear of causing trouble. I did not give advice right away. I told her she was not wrong for asking questions. I told her clarity was not betrayal. We went through her paperwork slowly, line by line, and there it was, the quiet disappearance of money disguised as help. Her eyes filled with tears. "I thought I was just forgetful," she whispered. I placed my hand over hers. "You are not forgetful. You are trusting." That moment stayed with me, not because of the money, but because I recognized myself in her. After she left, I sat for a long time, staring at the table. Something had shifted again. I realized my experience was not isolated. It was common, too common, and silence was protecting the wrong people. Over the next few weeks, more calls came. Friends of friends, people who had heard I helped someone understand their accounts. I did not advertise. I did not seek it out. But the need found me, and I answered, not as a professional, as someone who understood the cost of being dismissed. I started keeping notes again, not a ledger this time, a journal, names, stories, patterns. The same words repeated themselves across different lives. I forgot. I trusted. I did not want to cause conflict. I thought it was my fault. Each time I heard those phrases, my resolve grew stronger. This was not about money. It was about dignity. Daniel noticed the change. "You seem busier than ever," he said one evening. "I am," I replied, "but I am busy in the right way." He asked what I meant. I told him about the women, about the quiet losses, about how easily people dismiss the elderly. He listened carefully. "I think I was part of that," he said. Not unkindly, just honestly. I nodded. "We all are sometimes." That is how it continues. A few months later, the church asked if I would lead a small workshop. Nothing formal, just a conversation about financial awareness. I hesitated. I had never wanted attention. But then I remembered how alone I had felt standing at the bank that first morning. So I said yes. The room was small. A dozen folding chairs, coffee in paper cups, no microphones, no stage. I spoke plainly. I told my story without names. I talked about questions, about documentation, about trusting your instincts. I watched heads nod, eyes widened. Hand clutch purses are a little tighter. Afterward, people stayed. They asked questions, shared stories. I cried, laughed. Thank you. I went home exhausted, but fulfilled. That night, I slept deeply, the kind of sleep that only comes when your life aligns with your values. Daniel began volunteering with me. At first, quietly, helping people organize documents, explaining things patiently. I watched him change. Success had once made him distant. Service made him grounded. One afternoon, after helping an older man understand his pension, Daniel sat back and sighed. "I wish I had learned this earlier," he said. I smiled. "Better late than never." He nodded. I think I was chasing something I did not even want. I did not comment. Some realizations need to echo before they settle. Life did not become perfect. Relationships rarely do. But it became honest. And honesty has a way of healing what denial keeps wounded. Sometimes I still feel the ache of what was lost. Trust does not return to its original shape, but it can grow into something wiser, something stronger. I no longer measure my worth by what I provide. I measure it by what I protect: my time, my peace, my truth. And in protecting those things, I found something I had not expected: freedom, not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the kind that lets you sit by the window, tea warming your hands, knowing that whatever happens next, you will not betray yourself again. And that knowledge carries you gently into every new day. As the seasons shifted, I noticed how silence itself began to feel different. It was no longer heavy, it became spacious, the kind of quiet that lets thoughts arrive without fear. Some mornings I sat by the window and watched the light move across the walls, tracing patterns that changed with the hour. I had spent so much of my life reacting that simply observing felt like a gift I had never unwrapped before. Daniel started calling less out of obligation and more out of habit. He would ask small questions. How are your tomatoes doing? Did you sleep well? Do you need anything from the store? Simple questions, but they carried presence. One afternoon, he brought over an old photo album I had forgotten existed. He found it while clearing out storage. We sat at the table, turning pages slowly. Pictures of birthdays, school plays, camping trips where the tent leaned too far to one side. He laughed at photos of himself missing teeth, hair uneven from home haircuts. "You did your best," he said gently. I smiled. "I did what I knew how to do." He paused. "You did more than that." That moment felt like a bridge quietly rebuilding itself. Not with grand gestures, with acknowledgement. The calls from others continued. Not every story ended cleanly. Some people chose denial over clarity. I respected that. Truth cannot be forced. It must be invited. Others found the courage to confront what they had avoided. Sometimes that meant difficult conversations. Sometimes it meant legal steps. Sometimes it simply meant reclaiming awareness. Each outcome was different, but the pattern remained. Once people saw clearly, they stood taller, their voices steadied, their shame loosened its grip. I learned something important during those months. Most harm survives because it convinces its victims they are alone. Community dissolves that illusion. Even a quiet community. Even a small room with folding chairs and warm coffee. I stopped thinking of myself as someone who had survived something unfortunate. I began thinking of myself as someone who had learned something essential. There is power in paying attention, not suspicion, attention. One morning, I received a handwritten letter. The envelope was plain. Inside, a short note. "Thank you for helping me see I am not foolish for trusting. I am just wiser now." I held that letter for a long time. That sentence felt like the heart of everything. Trust does not make us weak, it makes us human. Wisdom teaches us where to place it. Daniel asked one evening if I ever regretted speaking up. I thought about it, about the disruption, about the consequences, about the distance that still lingered in some relationships. Then I answered honestly, no. Silence cost me more. He nodded slowly. "I think I am still learning that. We all are." There were days when memories surfaced unexpectedly, a comment, a tone, a dismissed concern. Those moments still stung. Healing is not erasure, it is integration. I learned to sit with discomfort without letting it define the day, to acknowledge pain without surrendering to it. I began writing again, not accounts, reflections, small observations about human behavior, about how easily kindness can be mistaken for weakness, about how often older voices are discounted simply because they speak softly. Writing helped me see patterns, not just in others, in myself. I had been taught to keep peace at all costs. I finally understood that peace without truth is just quiet resentment. Real peace is active. It requires boundaries, clarity, courage. I adjusted my life accordingly. I stopped apologizing for asking questions. I stopped minimizing my needs. I stopped explaining myself to people committed to misunderstanding. None of this made me harsher. It made me calmer. The church workshops became regular gatherings. Sometimes we talked about finances, sometimes about loneliness, sometimes about grief. Often those topics intertwined. Money, after all, is rarely just money. It represents security, control, fear, love, loss. I watched strangers become allies. I watched my shoulders relax. I watched laughter return. One man said something that stayed with me. I thought getting older meant becoming invisible, but here I feel seen. Visibility is not about being loud. It is about being acknowledged. Daniel brought his daughter one afternoon. She was quiet, observant. She sat beside me while we organized folders. At one point, she looked up and asked, "Why do people take advantage of others?" I considered how to answer. Sometimes because they can. Sometimes because they are afraid. Sometimes because no one ever taught them to stop. She nodded thoughtfully. I hope I never do that. I smiled at her. That hope is a good place to start. Later, Daniel told me he had begun rethinking his work life, reducing hours, delegating differently, choosing presence over constant expansion. I do not need to be impressive anymore, he said. I want to be decent. That sentence felt like a quiet victory. Not for me, for him. Life did not reward this shift with instant ease. Change rarely does. But it offered alignment. And alignment brings resilience. On evenings when the house felt too quiet, I reminded myself that loneliness and solitude are not the same. Loneliness aches, solitude restores. I had learned to tell the difference. I still missed my husband. That ache remained tender, but it no longer felt sharp. It felt companionable, like a memory that walks beside you rather than behind you. I sometimes spoke to him out loud, telling him about the people I had met, the small victories, the quiet moments. I imagined his smile, his steady presence. I think he would have approved. There is a strange strength that comes from losing everything you thought defined you and discovering you are still here, still capable, still needed, still growing. I did not become fearless. I became discerning. I did not become powerful. I became grounded. And in that grounding, I found something that had been missing for years: self-trust. That trust now guides my choices, my conversations, my silences, and it continues to teach me gently, day by day, that dignity is not something given by others. It is something we claim the moment we decide our voice matters, even when it trembles. Especially then. Time continued to move forward, not rushing, not dragging, simply unfolding one ordinary day at a time. I stopped counting weeks by problems and started measuring them by moments. A good conversation, a quiet afternoon, a sense of steadiness in my chest. Daniel began calling just to share small things: a thought from his drive home, something his daughter said at school, a recipe he was trying to learn. Nothing urgent, nothing heavy, just connection. I realized then that trust does not return all at once. It rebuilds through repetition, through showing up when there is nothing to gain. I allowed myself to receive it without suspicion. That was new for me. One evening, as I was closing the windows, I noticed how different the house felt. Not emptier, lighter. I had removed more than clutter. I had removed the habit of shrinking myself. The journal I once used for tracking losses became a place for reflection, not about others, about myself, what I needed, what I tolerated, what I no longer would. Writing those things down felt like drawing a map back to myself. I understood that strength is not loud. It does not announce itself. It simply refuses to disappear. There were still moments when doubt crept in, when old instincts whispered that I should smooth things over, let things slide, avoid discomfort. But I had learned the cost of that path. So I paused instead of pleasing. I breathed instead of explaining. And each time I did, The ground beneath me felt more solid. The people who stayed respected that change, the ones who did not quietly drifted away. I did not chase them. Peace does not require an audience. The work at the church continued, but I never called it work. It felt more like alignment, like being exactly where I was meant to be at this stage of life. I no longer feared getting older. Age has given me clarity. Clarity has given me courage, and courage had given me peace. I thought often about how many people live quietly, carrying the weight of being taken for granted, believing endurance is the same as love. It is not. Love does not require self-erasure. Care does not demand silence. Respect is not earned by suffering. If you are listening to this and something feels familiar, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not too sensitive. You are not difficult. You are not wrong for noticing. And you are allowed to stop giving when it costs you your dignity. This story was never just about money. It was about voice, about knowing when quiet becomes harmful, about choosing yourself without bitterness. I stayed quiet for a long time. Then I stopped giving what was never truly appreciated. And in that moment, I found my life again. If this story touched something inside you, if it reflected a truth you have been carrying silently, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Your story matters more than you know. If you believe in stories about quiet strength, resilience, and choosing dignity over approval, subscribe to this channel and stay with us. Here, voices like yours are not ignored, they are honored.